Hi, everybody. This is Pastor Susan, and welcome to another day of devotions this week as we are focusing on gathering to be empowered and the importance of community, especially in difficult situations. And today we're going to talk about the risk of being vulnerable. The risk of being vulnerable. And boy, do I need to hear that because so many times I struggle with that. I struggle with being vulnerable. And today I am going to be reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, the second letter that Paul writes to the Corinthians. And we're going to be talking about Paul's vulnerability because Paul did like to talk about himself, his relationship with God. He also recognizes that he is not perfect. And if you think about his early life and the fact that he was so zealous in persecuting Christians, but he discovered on the road to Damascus, and it was very humbling, the experience that he had, because he had his sight taken away from him. Like, he was blinded, literally blinded by the light and of Christ, and he was able to have a relationship that turned his life around. But Paul also wants to talk about pride and vulnerability. And so today, in the 12th chapter of Second Corinthians, Paul's talking about his visions and his revelations, and he wants them to know, he's having this great relationship with God, but also Paul is still having struggles. Okay? And I wonder, as we read this, we wonder about if it's his vision, because, and it may be resulting from that experience, that blinding light experience he had with Christ, that it left its mark. Very much like, if you remember the story of Jacob wrestling with God, and it takes, this is a good one for me, it takes his hip socket out of joint, and he has this limp that stays with him. So when we have this encounter with God, when we wrestle with God in some way, when we have an experience with God, it leaves its mark. And so here's what Paul has to say. I want to read verses 7 through 10, because Paul's talking about all these great revelations that he's had and everything. But he says, "Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong.'" Whenever I am weak, because of Christ, because of my relationship with Christ, your relationship with Christ, we have that opportunity to experience the strength that comes, not from ourselves, but from the living God. And I'm going to have an opportunity, and perhaps you will too, to experience that in your life, and to recognize that weaknesses, whatever they may be, physical, emotional, spiritual, we have an opportunity to acknowledge them, not to keep us down, but to recognize the power of prayer, the power of help, the power of God that comes to us when we are willing to be vulnerable. And here's what I know. When I'm willing to share my weaknesses, with others, almost without exception, that person is also encouraged to live their life with authenticity, with vulnerability, with recognizing that God is God and we are not, and to reach out to God, to receive the strength, to receive the power, to receive what we need in order to be faithful. Now, you notice here, Paul doesn't say, when when I have problems, when I have insults and hardships and persecutions and calamities, not for my own doing, but for the sake of Christ. For the sake of Christ. And so, today, what are you dealing with? What are some of the weaknesses that you are experiencing in your life for the sake of Christ? Can you confess them to each other? Can you be authentic with each other? I pray that I can be more authentic with you so that you know that I'm human too, but the power of God that is present in my life when I'm willing to admit that vulnerability grows stronger every single day. So maybe so in my life, as I'm going into a time when I'm really not going to be 100% Susan, as far as energy and all of that stuff goes. And may I realize that is through those times that I get the opportunity to lean more fully on Christ and to ask Christ to fill me with what I need and what you need in order to live more fully for Him. Maybe so in your life, and maybe so in my life now, today, and every day. Amen and amen.